5th Regiment, American Expeditionary Forces, U.S. Marines. Don was born in December 1901. He was 17 years old. He was writing letters from Europe to his girlfriend in Toledo, my future grandmother, Irma. She was 16. So to put that in context, that's like a sophomore and junior in high school. I had a chance to present something in January. Steve asked me to pick out a few things about my grandfather missing home, and I did that. Later, I'm going to have a chance to mention something about his battlefield experience. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. I have a postcard he sent to Irma. The postcard states that he arrived safely in Europe October 30th, 1918, so there were still about 2.5 months left in the war. He does mention he went through France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and he ended up in Germany. Before I talk about the combat, I'm going to mention something that he wrote home to Irma. He mentioned that he's leaving all his souvenirs behind except 3 rings and a matchbox. The rings, one was made from a French franc, one made from copper from an artillery shell, and one of fine silver he took off a dead German officer. And that really struck me. Here's this young man with all these bodies around him on a battlefield, you know, my grandfather. And a little bit of the combat. He mentions he was at Verdun near the end of the war. We took up, he says, we took up fronts in front of our artillery. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the barrage started. We went over at about 5 o'clock in the morning on November 1st. From 5 o'clock that morning until the 11th of November, it seems like a wild, bad dream. He mentioned something about troop coordination. As the troops moved, Don mentions that we drove on and on until November 9th, sometimes in the front, sometimes in support for the 9th and 23rd Infantry. We, the 5th Marines and the 6th Marines, acted together. And finally, on the 9th, he writes, the 9th of November, we dug in about 1 kilometer south of the Meuse River. On the 11th of November, we crossed it on pontoon bridges not more than a yard wide under a terrible barrage of artillery and machine guns. And in the morning, the war was over. So it was just like that. So the first few days of November must have been pretty harrowing for him. And what I read is a direct account from one of the battlefields of World War I by a United States Marine. Thank you.
Ben, you want to come up and read that one letter you can? Sure. This is Ben Lamb, who, and we're pretty easy about this, came up and said, well, I've got some letters from my great uncle. And I think this one ought to be very interesting, and then you can tell what happened, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
First of all, I do have a picture of him. Had I known earlier I could get this picture up, I would have brought it and had it put up there. But this is my great uncle, my grandmother's brother. And I'll read a little bit of this letter. I won't read the whole thing, but there's not a lot of description about battles in there. But he does say, and it's a pretty typical letter. It says, "Dear sister, just a few lines to let you know I'm feeling fine and hoping to find you the same. Would like to write oftener, but circumstances won't let me do that. You see, there's times that I can't write on account of the place where I am located, and besides, I do a great deal of hiking that prevents me from writing." I assume hiking meant, you know, troop movements and moving up to the line, etc. "I promise to write Mother twice a week. But at night, the noise of the cannons reminds us of the great day, and we were wondering what kind of time the people had at home." Now, he wrote this on the 7th of July, and he's talking about the 4th of July back home. And the cannons reminding him of, you know, the firecrackers and fireworks of the 4th of July. "I've done a great deal of hiking in the country, and must say it is a pretty country, but I haven't been in a large town yet. But I've hiked through a few that certainly were pretty, but don't always manage to do it. When I do write to her," being his mother, "I want the whole family to think that the letter is for all of you. Well, isn't a lot I can tell you, except we are having fine weather, and I spent a safe and sane 4th. I was hiking the night of the 3rd and pitched a pup tent the morning of the 4th and slept all day. Dear sister, though you don't hear from me as much as I think you and wonder how Benjamin, which was my father, how he's doing, and he was probably 6, 7 years old at that time. And I was wanting to see all of you. And well, sister, it's getting dark, and I guess I'll close with love to all, hoping to hear from you soon. Your loving brother, Samuel Livingstone, Company K, 166 U.S. Infantry, AEF, France. And that was on the 7th of July. Here's a letter that came about 3 months later, and this says,
Can I go back up?
Mrs. Agnes Livingston, Wilson, Pennsylvania. Dear Mrs. Livingston, your letter to the CO of Company K regarding this regiment has been referred to me for information regarding your son Samuel Livingston. On July 30th, 1918, while sacrificing it all for liberty and victory, he was hit by a piece of shrapnel in the leg on the bank of the river Rourke in France. He was rushed to a hospital at Villers-sur-Marne, but died bravely for his country. He was buried at the hospital cemetery, grave number 14. So this is about 6 months over. And that letter I read, the letter I read was actually on the 7th of July, and he was killed on the 30th of July. But that's the way things went in those days.
Steve? The 166th Regiment was part of the 42nd Infantry Division?
I have no idea. It just says
It was part of the Rainbow Division, which was commanded by Douglas MacArthur as a Brigadier General. They tried to get a unit from every state, a National Guard unit from every state.
So the 166, which is an Ohio National Guard unit, Douglas MacArthur had, as a brigadier, actually I think he was a colonel at the time, had the idea of putting together a Rainbow Division of a National Guard regiment from every state, which became the 42nd Infantry Division that fought in World War I. He commanded it as a brigadier general, but the 166th Infantry Regiment was the regiment from the state of Ohio,
Okay.
National Guard. So,
Well, this guy was, my great uncle was from Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. And, but it's interesting, I should have come to the Civil War things because I have letters from my great grandfather he wrote during the Civil War.
Well, thank you,
for you
Ben.
to come.
Thank you, Ben. And Bob back there, how long ago was it, gave a presentation on the Ohio National Guard in World War II. Okay, if you go over and check with Kirk, he's got a telegram, and I was going to have him read it, but I think we're going to get started if that's okay. But he's got a telegram that was received by his family about what happened to his ancestor. He was wounded, and the brevity of it, if you're a parent and you're getting something about your son, will give you a... You want to read it? Come on.
Yes, pretty good.
Yeah, Washington, D.C., June 18th, 1918. Rachel Kirk, Vandalia, Illinois. Regret to inform you, cablegram from abroad states that your son, Corporal Clifford Earl Kirk, Marine Corps, was severely wounded in action June 7th. No further particulars available. Official cablegrams cannot be sent asking about his condition, but you will be notified should any details be received. That's it. He got his eye shot out of Belleau Woods. But he made it. His scrapbook is over here if anybody wants to take a look.
Yeah, I urge you to check that out after Dr. Dory's presentation. And now, after waiting patiently, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Dory. He's a retired professor of history who didn't just teach in many cities, but on many continents. He is a Marine. I guess you're always a Marine, once a Marine, but he also served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam, and is a member of the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable, has presented a number of presentations there, and we're happy to have him here tonight with us regarding the Marines in World War I and Belleau Woods and other places. So, Mike.
Thank you. Let's see. Can everybody hear me? Yes, maybe? Okay. For those of you that are not Marines, the only ex-Marine are the dead ones. If you're still alive, you are a Marine. Period. Marines are different. They're different type soldiers. Okay? If you are one, you know what I'm talking about. If you're married to one like my poor, long-suffering wife, you can attest, because we were high school sweethearts, so she knew me before I went to Marine Corps. These two things that we have up front are designed for your glorification and edification, all of which goes to mean for 4 years the French and the British fought against the Germans. From the French viewpoint, this is the way the tactical warfare was set up. You assault in 4 waves. And the whole concept behind that is you're attacking German machine gun positions. The first 3 waves are going to get shot down, and the 4th one will make it. That goes to explain some of the reasons why the French took horrendous casualties in World War I. On the far side, oh, and by the way, this is up until 1918, because the Germans launched 4 massive offensives in the first part of 1918, and so trench warfare was completely out of the question. It was more like what you're going to see on the other side. What you see over there are what we would today call hedgerows, or waves of trees, tree lines, okay? That terrain that you're looking at is indicative of hill number 142 and the Battle of Belleau Woods. Those 2 things took place at the same time. And so, very simply, the Marines were designed to they were taught to attack like this, okay? They were taught by the French. Marines aren't stupid. I mean, you might be crazy, but they're not stupid, all right? And so, very simply, what you see is there's only 2 waves, 2 lines. Well, I hate to tell you, compliments to the French, that's all that managed to make it to the battle when the battle started. So the Marines are attacking under strength, at half strength. They're attacking units that are twice the size of themselves, not counting the fact that they're only at half strength. And so very simply what you have is Marines in the front, and you have Germans dug in the 2 tree lines behind it. I'm going to be talking about Hill 142 and the Battle of Belleau Woods. That will give you a clue of what it looked like. All right? That's from actual terrain from the battlefields itself. This is, yeah, just made up. Anyway. So, if you're a Marine, this first sentence is very real to you. The U.S. Army has never liked the Marine Corps. End of statement, period, no questions asked. During the Mexican War, the U.S. Civil War, and the Spanish-American War, the story is exactly the same. So why would World War I be any different? On the April 6, 1917, the government of the United States violated 100 years of U.S. foreign policy and declared war on people who demanded freedom of the seas. They sided with the British against restricted trade, and whom they fought a war with in 1812 over freedom of the seas. Big money had triumphed over morality. When the war started for the U.S., the War Department and the U.S. commander in France, General John J. Pershing, all repeatedly refused the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Major General George Barnett, offered to send Marines to France. And I believe we have General Barnett up there. On May 16, 1917, the Secretary of War requests a regiment of Marines to be sent to France. They don't exist. There were not enough Marines in existence to form a Marine regiment. It would have to be created from scattered units throughout the U.S. fleet and from recruitment. 40 veterans and 200 recruits formed each company, one at a time. Many of the officers were new and untrained. That meant they would rely on the grizzled old veteran non-commissioned officers to train the new men for combat. It worked. The largest Marine organizations that did exist are companies, and they're aboard battleships. No Marine officer has ever commanded units above the company level, ever. The U.S. Army objects to the Marines. Hello, that's like the sun rises in the east. They are merely guards, not soldiers. General Pershing finally condescends if the Marines agreed to Army organization and command structure. This meant 256-man companies commanded by a captain. 4 companies formed a 1,024-man battalion led by a major. 3 battalions with 30,806 men formed a regiment commanded by a colonel. Supply and headquarter companies were attached to the regimental command, along with a machine gun company. 2 regiments formed a brigade, 8,417 men under the command of a brigadier general. The brigade also included expanded support units like medical and ordnance units and a 4-company machine gun battalion. The Marines agreed. There were not enough men and officers. Recruits were a problem, but training, or as the Marines call it, boot camp, would resolve this given enough time. Officers were another matter. When war was declared, only 511 Marine officers were on active duty. The reserves provided another 43 men. Of all these men, only 193 were either first or second lieutenants. A full brigade required 38 captains and 179 first and second lieutenants. To get the required men, the Marine Corps pulled together 761 new officer candidates from April through October 1917. They came from graduates and former graduates of the Naval Academy, warrant officers, paymaster clerks, and non-commissioned officers. The largest group of candidates, 284, though, came from the graduates of military schools such as Virginia Military Institute, Norwich Academy, Texas A&M, Virginia Polytechnical Institute, and Culver Military Academy. Another 136 civilian candidates were found who passed some type of military training or who passed a competitive examination on July 10, 1917. Many of these last group came from great universities and were champion athletes. Even with all of these efforts, the officer ranks were not filled. Therefore, Army officers were to fill and command Marine Corps platoons in 1918. The 5th Marine Regiment sailed with the 1st American contingent to France and arrived on June 26, 1917. The Commandant was not satisfied. He immediately began forming the 6th Marine Regiment to form a Marine Brigade. And without the knowledge and approval of the Army, the Secretary of the Navy wrote to President Wilson on August 4, 1917, and requested that an additional regiment of Marines to form a brigade. The President approved the request the same day, August 4th. General Pershing got wind of the change and objected. On September 17, 1917, Brigadier General Henry McCain, the Adjutant General of the Army, informed General Pershing that The President has directed an additional regiment to be sent, and it is now impossible to change the arrangement. You will form a brigade, and it will become part of the 2nd Division. Then he ended his message with, about 1,200 men of the 6th Marine Regiment sails today. There would be a brigade of 2 regiments of Marines in France. General Pershing was furious. The Marines were into World War I at brigade strength and to the consternation of the Army. And by December 1917, 197 officers and 6,476 men were in the 4th Marine Brigade in the 2nd U.S. Army Division. And with the addition of the 6th Machine Gun Battalion, the brigade strength reaches 9,444 men, the largest unit ever formed of Marines. You would think that was the end of the story. It's over, right? You'd be wrong. General Pershing ordered the Marines to be spread out along the lines of supply to, quote, guard them, to unload ships and build a dam. And his excuse? We don't have enough Army troops to do this, and this is their forte. It wasn't until February 10th, 1918, the brigade finally came together. They now began training for war. By the 10th of March, 1918, both regiments were assembled, and the 3rd Army Brigade is formed, arrived, and the 2nd Division is formed under Army Major General Omar Bundy. The Germans in 1918 were attempting to end the war before the Americans could get there in large numbers. There were several major offensives planned and executed by Imperial Germany until May 27, 1918. Then Operation Blucher, supported by the largest artillery barrage of the war, attacked the British. They were overwhelmed. The Germans advanced 30 miles in 5 days. Nothing like this had ever happened in World War I. More than 50,000 Allied soldiers were captured. Paris was threatened. The Allies panicked. They called upon the Americans for help. General Pershing condescended and agreed to help. On May 30th, 1918, the Germans launched a massive assault to capture Paris. The French army had collapsed, and the French government was in panic. They were packing and leaving Paris to the Germans. The 2nd Division was ordered to join the French army's attempt to halt the German advance. They would be transported most of the 56 miles to the front in French trucks. Then they marched. The Marines arrived and created a defensive position directly behind the French. The Marines were holding a line more than 2 miles long, with the French retreating through their lines. On June 3rd, 1918, a French officer approached the 51st Company headquarters, took out a pad of paper and wrote in English, "Run for your lives! The Germans are coming!" And he gave it to Captain Lloyd Williams, United States Marine Corps. He responded, "Retreat, hell! We just got here!" And so the legend was born. As the German advanced, Marines began firing at 800 yards. 800 yards. If you've been in the military, you know right now the maximum range is 500 yards. And if you're in the Army, they only shoot at 200 and 300. The Marines still fire at 5. But in World War I, they were firing at 800 yards. The Germans were concerned that an enemy unit was panicking. Then the casualties began to mount. They believed they had encountered a unit armed only with machine guns. The advance stalled, then halted. Paris was saved. As the French withdrew, Hill 142 remained in the center of the Marine position between the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments, but not occupied by either. One example of the battle was the French 12th Madagascar Battalion. In 6 days of fighting, they lost 46 men killed in action, 248 men wounded in action, and 220 men missing in action, for a total of 564 casualties. It had almost ceased to exist. On June 4th and 5th, the Germans attacked and eventually gained Hill 142, and then they occupied Belleau Woods. The 2nd Division was now moved to attack opposite 2 German divisions in the Belleau Wood area. This was a hunting preserve prior to World War I, thus the type of terrain that you see over there. The morning of June 6, 1918, the Marines were to attack Hill 142. The lead companies advanced a mile to their attack positions. Their supports were to wait to be relieved by the French. The French were late. What's new? At 5 o'clock, 1/3 of the planned Marines that were to attack were ready. They were to support a French attack. It didn't happen. The French were not there. But at 5 o'clock, the Marines were attacking across a wheat field. German machine guns in the advanced woods opened fire, but were eventually overrun. Then the next wheat field to attack the next tree line. That also was taken by the Marines. Then on to the crest of the hill, and it too was taken. With a victory on Hill 142, the Marines advanced farther toward the town of Dory. They were now through the German front line and into their reserves. The Germans counterattacked. 2 Marines actually made it to Dory. They were never heard from again. In 1927, 2 dead bodies in Marine uniforms were found in a small pit on the south end of Dory. 2 German bodies lay in the pit as well. The reserve Marine companies finally arrived and attacked into the teeth of the German counterattack. This went on all day. The French never did show up. The Marines dug in and prepared to hold. With the victory on Hill 142 in the morning of June 6th, the French ordered the 2nd Division to take Belleau Wood. French intelligence said it was unoccupied. They were wrong. General Munday, the 2nd Division commander, directed the attack to begin at 5 p.m. on June 6th. The orders were sent. The attack was on. Some units were not able to participate. Their orders arrived after 5 p.m. One unit attacked at 5:15, another at 6 o'clock. The 2 battalions that did attack were faced with either 400 yards of green wheat or a completely open field before the wood line. Both battalions attacked. The 20th Company 5th Marines started with 247 Marines. At the end of the day, 107 officers and men were casualties. The 4th Company 5th Marines attacked at 5:15. They made it to the woods. At 5 o'clock, Captain Smith's 82nd Company of the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment led the attack. Their mission was the town of Barocius. German machine guns made the wheat field wave like water. Artillery airburst claimed Marines. Other shells would throw up large columns of smoke and dirt, but the 82nd Company came on. Eventually, the Germans pulled back to prepared positions in the woods, downed trees and machine guns in the trees, still standing, created an interlocking field of fire that was deadly and stopped the Marine advance. Then the Marines reverted to their experience in the Caribbean, something none of the other countries had. Individuals advanced to grenade range and took out machine gun nests. The 83rd Company was behind the 82nd. They made it to the woods with no casualties. Then the Germans counterattacked. It was repulsed. Other elements of the 83rd Company went through the woods, came out the other side, and found themselves behind the Germans. Eventually, the 83rd Company halted. Then scattered remnants of other companies found their way to the 83rd. Nearby, the 84th and 97th Companies of the 6th Marine Regiment were advancing. They eventually halted and reinforced the other companies. Now, the 2nd Battalion advanced on Borchis. The 96th Company actually captured part of the town. Then the 79th Company survivors made it to Borchis. The 2 companies cleared the Germans out and held the town. At the end of June 6th, the 4th Brigade had 1 intact battalion and thousands of dead and wounded Marines. The battle raged until June 26, 1918. By then, the brigade suffered 1,095 killed, missing, and dead of wounds, 3,615 wounded, for a total casualty rate of over 50%. For the second major battle of the Marines in World War I, a little background is needed. The Germans held the Marne salient that had only one rail line supporting their troops. That rail line ran from Soissons to Château-Thierry. Now, Château-Thierry is a region. It's not just the name of a town, but it's the name of a region. And that will become important after the war, in the war of words between the Army and Marines. The American 1st and 2nd Divisions were badly in need of replacements after the battles of Cantigny and Belleau Woods. Both divisions were brought to full strength in early July 1918. Then on July 12th, both divisions were assigned to the newly created 3rd American Corps, which was assigned to the French 6th Army. On July 14th, what's that day? Everybody know what that day is?
Bastille.
Bastille Day, right. The French 4th of July, all right? They were transferred to the French 10th Army. The major assault on the German army was to begin on July 18th without a preparatory artillery bombardment. Because of the magnitude and importance of the attack, the highest secrecy was to be maintained. It was. On July 16, 1918, Major General Harbord, the new commander of the 2nd Division, complained that he found the 2nd Division entering another disorganizing secret mission, scattering its units with no information to the division of their actual destination. Thus, when the new division commander himself arrived, he found a command short of artillery and trains and no one in authority there who had any idea as to the purpose of the movements or when, if ever, the division might expect to be brought together again. On Tuesday night, July 16th, this is 2 days before the assault, 2 days, General Harbord was informed that his division would be in the attack on July 18th at daybreak. He didn't even know where his men are. With his division scattered through the Aisne department, our division would arrive at Marseille, where they would be met by an unknown with orders, but I knew nothing of where they were to go. The division had been completely removed from the knowledge and control of its responsible commander and deflected by truck and by marching through France to a destination uncommunicated to any authority responsible for its supply, its safety, or its efficiency with an attack 30 hours away. This is the French. French General Bourdelin and his people were unable to say where it would be debussed or where orders could reach it or if it would be moved to its place in time. But the Germans knew. On the morning of July 17th, General Harbord and his staff set out at dawn in the rain. It had been raining constantly, to locate his division, to distribute orders, and to prepare for the attack. They were able to locate the artillery brigade, but nothing else. Eventually, Colonel Malone, the commander of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army, arrived with some of his command. He sent out runners to inform everyone else where their area of concentration was and where division headquarters was. By mid-morning of July 17th, much of the 2nd Division began to arrive. The French debussed them 12 to 15 miles from their attack positions. They slogged their way forward in rain through the Moroccan 1st Division, 2 French 2nd Line divisions, a division of the 30th French Corps, a cavalry corps, tanks, corps and army artillery, and all the special services supporting these troops. They went without sleep for 48 hours and would pass out during any halt. They had no maps, no guides, and they were not told where to go. Welcome to France. At the announced supply point, there was not enough ammunition to go around. Hello. Most of the machine guns were lost in the rear area and did not rejoin the division until July 19th. As a consequence, the 5th Machine Gun Battalion did not receive their guns until the day of the battle. The 4th Machine Gun Battalion made its way into the forest without guns and ammunition, and the 6th Machine Gun Battalion, although carrying guns and ammunition, did not arrive at the jump-off point in time to go over with the infantry. On the morning of July 18th, Colonel Malone, the commander of that 23rd Infantry, was informed by his staff that his 3rd Battalion was missing. In the rain and darkness, he went looking for them, finally found them, as well as 2 Marine battalions, and sent them all off to where they're supposed to be. July 18th initially went smoothly for the Marines. The 6th Marines were in divisional reserve. Well, that makes it nice and easy, right? You don't have to do anything. The 5th Marines advanced into the woods as planned. The 5th Marine frontage was that of a brigade. So 2 battalions jumped off together in line. They had learned how to attack the interlocking fire of the Germans. One section would attack for a few seconds and then go to ground. The German machine guns would concentrate on these troops as other Marines arose and attacked in a different area. When the German machine guns would change their fire, the second group went to ground, and the first group arose and attacked. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. When they were close enough, the Marines either threw grenades into the machine gun nest or simply attacked with the bayonet. Proper prior planning. The 2nd Division was sandwiched between 2 French divisions. To their left was the 1st Moroccan Division. Among their units in the division were a French Foreign Legion regiment and a regiment from Senegal. In one incident, the 66th Company was completely dispersed. A Sergeant Kochak got separated from his Marines and stumbled upon about 25 Senegalese troops without an officer. Not able to speak French, with hand and arm signals, he took command of the Senegalese troops and continued to attack the Germans. The day's fight in the rain-soaked woods was at close quarters and in many cases hand-to-hand. Casualties were high, but they met all of their objectives for the day. On Friday, July 19th, the 6th Marines replaced the 5th Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Lee, to cover the same frontage of the previous day, deployed the Marines the same way on a 2-battalion front. The 2nd Battalion advanced and occupied abandoned German foxholes until about 4 p.m. The 1st Battalion advanced with tanks. Yes, they actually had some in World War I. They weren't with it, but they were there. They were taking heavy artillery and machine gun fire. By 10:30, Lieutenant Colonel Lee reported that the 83rd and 84th Companies both had 60% casualties, so he sent the 82nd and headquarters companies forward. By 11:45, his 1st Battalion was stalled and casualties were at 30% and climbing. Lieutenant Mason took over command of the 84th Company and advanced and captured Hill 160. This was the farthest advance of the American 2nd Division in the battle, and about 700 yards short of the Cizon-Chateau-Thierry road. At the end of the day, the 3rd Battalion had been committed, and it had only 415 men and 20 officers left, out of 850 men and 36 officers when they started the day. General Harbord decided the 2nd Division could hold but no longer advanced. He requested the 2nd Division be relieved. They were on the French 58th Colonial Division. The 2nd Division had outrun its support on both flanks, as well as its own artillery. Total casualties for the battle, 2,015. The 3rd battle that involved the Marines was Mont Blanc. Actually, the French reversed it, Blanc Mont. Right. It just means white mountain. It began on October 3rd, 1918. The French and Americans opened an offensive attack on 26 September. It was designed to capture the railroad centers and for the Germans to be pushed out of the Champagne region, which they had occupied for more than 4 years. The American First Army was to attack on the right, and the French Fourth Army would attack on the left. The German Third Army wanted to delay the French long enough to open a gap between the French and Americans, exposing the American army to a flank attack on their left. By 30 September, that's exactly what happened. The French asked for help. General Pershing responded with the battle-hardened 2nd Division and the Green 36th. The Marines would be under French overall command. Major General John Lejeune. Have you ever heard of him? If you were in the Marine Corps, you know who that name is. All right. Major General John Lejeune was the first Marine officer to command the division in combat. He had only recently assumed command of the division on 28 July. He had a battle-hardened team that had seen action at Belleau Woods and Cizeaux. Brigadier General Hanson Ely, U.S. Army, commanded the 3rd Brigade. Brigadier General Neville, United States Marine Corps, commanded the 4th Brigade. And Brigadier General Albert Bowley, U.S. Army, commanded the 2nd Field Artillery Brigade. They all supported General Lejeune's tactical ideas, which were different than General Pershing's. Being under French overall command gave General Lejeune latitude to do what he wanted. He was planning a methodical, limited objective, set-piece attack. What this meant was that as the infantry achieved its initial objective, light artillery battalions would advance and keep up with the infantry. When they caught up, they would deploy en masse and cover the next assault. This was different from General Pershing's tactics that assigned individual batteries to infantry units. Pershing's infantry would thus move faster, but not have much artillery support, thus taking more casualties and thus eventually halting their attacks. General Lejeune's initial deployment was also unique. There was more than a mile between the 3rd and 4th Brigade assault positions. Their attacks would close this gap when they reached their objective. The French thought this was insane. At 5:50 a.m. on the 3rd of October, the 2nd Division attacked. By 8:40, the 3rd Brigade had reached its target. It was followed by the 6th Regiment of Marines, which had been held up by a longer distance to travel and a lack of French support on its left flank. The 5th Regiment pivoted to provide that support. In under 3 hours, the U.S. had captured Blanc-Mont, which the French Army had failed to do in 4 years. After consolidating their objective and having brought forward the guns, the U.S. troops attacked again behind a rolling barrage and had taken all of their final objectives. On the morning of 4 October, the 5th Regiment attacked again and captured more ground. On their right, the Army 23rd Infantry Regiment stalled and fell back, thus exposing the Marines to attack on 3 sides. The Marines held. In the morning of the 5th of October, the artillery fired an hour-long barrage, followed by a creeping barrage. The Marines advanced and without losing a single man, captured their left flank, secured their left flank, capturing 200 Germans and 75 machine guns. The French were continuing to demand that the Americans advance. They had pushed the Germans back farther and faster than the French ever had, and they wanted more. On the morning of 6 October, after a 1-hour-long barrage, the guns opened a creeping barrage, and both brigades advanced, capturing their objectives within 3 hours. The St. Etienne Orfel Road was American. The 36th Division would reinforce the 2nd Division, and the assault continued. Finally, on the 10th of October, the 2nd Division was pulled out of Rouen. The Marines had suffered 4,821 casualties, as opposed to twice that amount at Belleau Woods. They had fought for 7 days as opposed to 20 days at Belleau Woods. Under Marine command, intense artillery support, and skillful combined armed tactics, the objectives were taken. Blanc-Mont was the 2nd Division's most significant contribution to winning the war. The U.S. 2nd Infantry Division's capture of the heavily defended German positions in France's Blanc-Mont Ridge on October 3 through 10 was the most skillfully executed American divisional attack of World War I. For this action, both the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments were cited by the French Army for the 3rd time with the Cross of Gallantry, and thus earned the right to wear the French fourragère as part of their dress uniforms, which they still do to this day. But if you think this was all the Marines in World War I, you'd be wrong. The 5th Marine Brigade, the what? The 5th Marine Brigade was formed at Quantico in September 1918. It consisted of the 11th and 13th Marine Regiments and the 5th Machine Gun Battalion. It also served in France. But here's the Army again. But mostly as service and supply as guards. They continued to serve until July 1919, when they assembled at Brest and returned to the United States in early August 1919. Additionally, at various times, Marine officers were attached to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 26th, 32nd, 35th, 90th, and 92nd Divisions, and in some cases engaged in operations with them. Also, Marine aviation personnel served in France as the day wing of the Northern Bombing Group of the Navy. A few Marine officers and enlisted men engaged in Army aviation operations, and about 20 Marine officers were sent to France as observers and participated in operations with American, French, and British forces. While in Europe, the Marine flyers served with squadrons 217 and 218, bombing squadrons of the Royal Air Force of England. There you have it.
Very good.
Down and dirty. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
You talked about the casualties. Do you have any idea how many Marines were lost in World War I? Anybody ever total?
All of them.
I asked that because the History Channel claims America lost 200,000 troops in World War I. I have no idea whether that's accurate or not, but I just saw something the other night about it. And I just wondered how many of that, as a percentage, might have been Marines.
Let me put it to you this way. In more than one case, Marine clerks in headquarters companies were carrying rifles attacking the Germans because of the casualties in the other battalions. And so, when you have that kind of a problem, your communications falls down. It just disintegrates. And that's one of the things when you read about this, when you read about those support units, you'll find the answer to your question is, we don't know. Just like those 2 Marines that they found in 1927. Okay? They have, you know what a dog tag is, right? Okay, they had those things in World War I. They did. The problem is that in some cases, Belleau Woods, for example, okay, when they finally pull the Marines out of there after the 20 days, all right? There are bodies all over that thing, okay? If you look at the total casualties of the Marine Brigade in Belleau Woods, it's almost 100%. Now that doesn't make any sense, all right? But what you have to understand is as soon as they started taking casualties, they had replacements that they brought in. The Army, in its wisdom, okay, had a division set up for nothing but replacements. And so they would organize the troops that came in, got off the ships, and so forth, and then just feed them into the units that needed them, all right? There were some replacements that went in at Belleau Woods. In the first couple days, there were casualties, okay? But when you start counting the casualties, you count bodies. You don't count when they started, all right? You know approximately how many you had when you started. 9,444. Over 9,000 of them were casualties. There were over 9,000 casualties when Battle of Belleau Woods was over. Now that included replacements and reinforcements that were sent in, okay? Nobody actually knows, all right? We lived in Germany for 11 years. We know where the Battle of the Marne took place. We were there. We walked in, we lived within 500 yards of France, okay? So if you want to go on a picnic, you just walked over and sat under a tree in France and nobody cared, okay? But one of the things that surprised me was that when we were in Zweibrücken, we were in the West Wall. The bunkers were still there from 1938, 1939. And we were there in the late 80s, okay? Or late 70s, early 80s. When we went to France and we went to the Marne area, they were still digging up stuff. I mean, they were uncovering bodies, okay? When you come out of Saarbrücken, you go up a hill, because Saarbrücken is a bridge over the Saar River. That's where it gets its name from. The Saar River cuts a line through a mountainous area, okay? You go up, you cross the Saar River, you go up and you have the top. And there's a little church. Well, there's a little sign, M-U-S-E-U, museum in French, okay? And when we were coming back from Paris, I took a diversion and drove in there. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were with us. Our son was about, okay? And my father-in-law walked into this barn and was absolutely amazed, okay? The name of this town was Tours, T-O-U-R-S. And it was about as big as, from here to the traffic light, okay? And I don't know if you ever heard of the Battle of Mars-la-Tours. It's the largest cavalry battle in history. And we were there, that took place in the 1870s, between the Franco-Prussian War, all right? They're still digging up stuff there. They're picking it up and they're bringing it in and they just, you know. And so when you walk in, there's this pile of junk, literally, that farmers have, you know, just plowed up and they threw it down into the museum. And the guy that runs the museum, he just picks it up every now and then, wash it off, and then put it up. The casualty rates were just obscene. And that's the easiest word I can use, is obscene, all right?
Mike,
Yes,
it says there were 12,000 Marine casualties in World War I
12,000?
and 320,000 total US casualties.
That's a good guess, as good as anybody else's.
It's on the internet, it must be true.
That's right.
Yeah, right, right.
It's the US government's.
Yeah.
Sir,
I'm going to ask this badly, and I'll ask you to bear with me. If I look at the battle of Mont Blanc, I get the idea that the Marines were aggressively patrolling in front of them and using fire maneuvers. But they didn't. Did they not use that at Belleau Woods?
Belleau Woods was their first battle, okay? Remember, they had been trained to fight like this, right here. Because when you get to France, finally get organized, the first thing they'll do is they send you to the French army to be trained in how to fight. Because when the U.S. went over there, they carried basically rifles. They didn't even carry machine guns, okay? Unlike what I've got over there. The BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle, could have been used by U.S. Marines and the U.S. Army in World War I. The U.S. government just decided they didn't want the Germans getting their hands on it. I mean, but anyway, so this is the way they were taught to fight, okay? You have to remember how many of these officers never been in combat.
Yeah.
They don't know any better. And here you're looking at this French officer, well, you don't have a beard. He just, you know, with a beard and all scruffy looking and everything. And this is the way you attack a German position. Okay. I don't know any better. They didn't know any better. They figured it out. They figured it out. And one of the things, the Germans just could not believe that the Americans were riflemen, especially the Marines. It just didn't make any sense to them. In many of their machine gun units, they didn't have any other weapon. They just had a machine gun. Okay? So when you overran their machine gun position, they had nothing to fight with. They just turned around and ran. Okay? They didn't have bayonets. They didn't have pistols. They didn't have rifles. They didn't even have grenades. Okay? They basically had that machine gun, which is what you see. Okay? These are actually German uniforms and German weapons you'll see over here. The French, those are actual French units, that uniforms of the 1914-15 time period, and those are Marines of 1918 time period. And being a historian, I'm a miniature collector, and a few other off-the-wall words.
And that 2nd Division patch, did they ever transfer that to the Army?
That is an Army patch.
And you were talking about the 2nd Division Marines, or were you about it?
Yeah, well, the Marine Brigade was in the 2nd Division.
Okay, that clarifies it.
Okay? They were the 4th Brigade to be formed. So the 1st Division had the 1st Brigade and 2nd Brigade. 2nd Division had the 3rd Brigade and the 4th Brigade.
So they wore that patch.
They wore that patch. They didn't have anything else. When I was in the Army, I had been in the Marine Corps for 3.5 years. I'd been in Vietnam, okay? So I'm a combat soldier. I was a sergeant. And in the Army, what you do is you have 2 patches, one on one side, one on the other. Well, I was in the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. There is no such. They don't have an Army military patch. So I wore the patch of the 1st Marine Division. I'm an Army uniform. You think I didn't get weird looks? and you should have, I don't know if you guys know what fruit salad is. If you've been in the military, those are your military decorations. I had 3 rows when I was in Army basic training. When I showed up, those guys looked at me and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Because I had 6 years in the Marine Corps at that time. Okay. And I said, "I'm just following orders." That's it. I'm just following orders. And I was selected as the trainee company commander for the March in Review, and the general in charge of Fort Dix was standing there. Now, you probably already figured out I have a stentorian voice. My Marines in Vietnam could hear my voice over machine gun fire. That's very comforting if you've ever been in combat, to hear a friendly voice. And very simply, I pushed troops as a corporal. Every Marine corporal learns how to do that. So by the time I became sergeant, anyway, I'm now in Army basic training, and I'm pushing troops. As a trainee, I'm pushing troops. And some of the Army E6, he didn't like me at all. He just absolutely did not like, because I was everything he wasn't. And all he had to do was look at me. And when I fell out, okay, and I had asked my dad to send my fruit salad, okay, it arrived the day before, so I put it on. He was so angry. He was just, well, let me put it this way. He was black as the ace of spades, but he was so livid that his face was red. Okay? And he ordered me to go see the company commander. Okay, so I did. Went in, saluted, because he accused me of being a PF soldier. Okay? So he's got my 201 file. Don't know what that is. If you're in the military, that's your military record. He looked at that and he said one thing. When was the last time you qualified with a rifle? That was the only question he asked me, okay? Because I was wearing it, okay? And I said, I think it was 4 years ago. And he said, well, according to Army regulations, you can't wear that unless you've qualified within the last year. Listen to what he said. Would you please take it off? So I did. I came out and that E6 was looking at me, and it's all still there. It's all still there, including the pistol sharpshooter, okay? He just couldn't believe it. He could not believe it. Anyway, that's, okay? These are tales from the Marine Corps and my exploits in the Army.
Any other questions?
Any other good questions?
Yeah, and can I interrupt just a minute? Because if you had a better moderator, we'd have done this. But Kirk, what was the date of the telegram sent to your family?
The date of the telegram was the 18th, but it,
Of what?
of June 1918.
Okay, so that's Belleau Woods, right?
I beg your pardon?
Based on what you said, that's Belleau
Yeah,
Woods,
this is
June 18th.
82nd Company.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
82nd Company?
Yeah.
So
yes.
we can then put that into context where they were. Ben, what was the date on the letter your family got the bad news?
Well, actually, it was, he was killed on the 30th of July,
Okay.
but the letter explaining the situation didn't arrive till December.
Okay, so 30th of July, was that Soissons then?
Well, it's
Yes.
right between those two battles.
There was Sasson. Yeah, well, they could have been wounded.
Okay.
Okay.
Questions for Mike?
And I'll be here to answer any questions about this mess up front.
Thank you, Mike. Volunteered to stay and talk a little bit about the tactical things he's got up here if you want to talk to him. Kirk over there has got all his equipment. If you want to see what the Marines were using, go talk to him. Thank you all for coming. And what time do we have?